But first of all, thanks to the Brazilian president, it turned out that Biden did in fact believe that Russia needed to be destroyed. However, Biden thought that the pus from this abscess should be drained slowly and extremely carefully. As it turns out, Trump doesn't have such clear internal convictions, simply because he doesn't have any internal convictions at all. And he believes that boils and tumors also have the right to their own opinion, which should be patiently listened to. And today, the Yellow Donald committed yet another absurd act. He spent an hour talking with that very Putin, whom he had called crazy. And for that entire hour, he was essentially cooing with him. Putin, of course, having apparently forgotten that he was, let's say, publicly slapped in the face before the whole world by being called crazy, spent an entire hour whining to Trump about Zelensky's cruelty, the ferocity of the Ukrainian army's drones, and somehow once again managed to move Trump. Trump asked the Senate not to bring up the issue of tightening sanctions against Russia for the time being. In other words, we are dealing with some rather mysterious cycles of the Yellow Donald. And the world is holding its breath, waiting to see if maybe tomorrow or even in an hour, Trump will suddenly get the right urge or be bitten by some clever flea. But unfortunately, the rains and fleas are not yet pleasing. And so these dream and hope that he might suddenly show some sense, because after all, there have been some presidentials not come true so far. But we do know that Trump has repeatedly declared himself to be a very religious person. Well, and religiosity always guarantees the inadequacy of its bearer and, let's say, the inability to establish cause and effect relationships. But we remember that religiosity is not something bad. It's simply an indicator of a person's level of development. And at the same time, to be fair, a high level of development is, in general, absolutely unnecessary for everyone. It is a heavy and dangerous burden that cuts off a person's ability to engage in many acts of meanness, idiocy, and absurd behavior. And yes, Putin did lash out, and he really did manage to win over Trump again. But we know that Putin had some cards to play, because the investigative committee clung for a long time to the version of sabotage in both the Kursk and Bryansk regions when trains were damaged. Then they dropped this version because of how idiotic it was. Well, everything there was really just too obvious and telling. And you can check on my Telegram channel the very overpass in Bryansk that, according to the investigative committee, was supposedly blown up, had actually been closed since April 25th or May 25th due to its hazardous condition and dilapidation. But then the same investigative committee that found no evidence of an explosion changed its position again. And now somehow they have managed to invent this evidence. But we remember that the investigative committee is an exceptionally, spectacularly deceitful organization. This is the same investigative committee that found proof that the elderly pediatrician Bionova was an extremist and sent her behind bars. This is the same investigative committee that managed to procure evidence that the writer Akunin is a terrorist. And then there's the disgrace with Crocus, where for a long time, they insisted there was a Ukrainian connection. And then it turned out there wasn't even a hint of any such link. Well, all of these really says everything you need to know about the investigative committee